Welcome to the Golden Gate Area Council STEM Activity Series, brought to you by the Golden Gate Area Council STEM Committee. My name is Caroline Suyuki, and today we are going to ask a wonder question. What makes things float? So why do things float? Why do things sink? In order to understand what that is about, we have to actually look around us and observe certain things. For example, have you ever wondered why, if you put a nail in a glass of water, it sinks right to the bottom? But if you look at these very large cruise ships that are on the ocean, they seem to float. So sometimes little things will sink and sometimes big things will float. What's going on? It really has to do with two things. How much something weighs, that is its mass, and how much space it occupies. It's called volume. So there are two things to be considered here. One is the mass of an object, or how much it weighs, and also how much space it actually occupies. To illustrate this, we have two objects that are about the same size. One of them happens to be a ball of clay, and the other happens to be a ping pong ball. They look to be about the same size. And I've got a glass of water that has a mark on it where my water is. So what makes things float has a lot to do with displacement. Okay, it's a big word, displacement, but let's look at what's going on here. This ball of clay occupies a certain amount of space. This ping pong ball also occupies about the same space, but look what happens. I'm going to take this ball of clay and I'm going to put it in the water. If you notice, I made a little mark where my water is. And I'm going to take this ball of clay and I'm going to drop it into the water. And notice the water level rises. And I'm going to make a new mark where the water level is. Now, what is going on? The clay and the water cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So when you put the clay in the water, it pushes the water out of the way. It displaces that water. So the water has to go somewhere, it goes up. Because the weight of the clay is heavier than the water that it is pushing, the clay sinks. Now let's look at what goes on with the ping pong ball. This ping pong ball occupies about the same space as the clay, but I'm going to put it in the water. And if you notice, it hardly changes the height of the water at all. Just a very, very, very tiny amount of water is being displaced. What's going on? Well, the ping pong ball isn't heavy enough to push all of the water out of the way, but it does weigh something, and so it is able to displace a very, very small amount of water. The weight of the water is equal to the weight of the ping pong ball. Therefore, the ping pong ball is going to float. Okay, so once again, to recap, if the weight of an object is greater than the weight of the water that it will occupy or it will displace, it's going to sink. If the weight of an object is equal to the weight of the water it can displace, it will float. So in today's lab, we're going to be building boats. We're going to be building boats out of clay. But if you know anything about boats, you know that they are useless unless they are able to carry some cargo. So in today's experiment, you are going to be building a boat that also can carry cargo. So today, you are tasked with two things. Number one, You must build a boat that floats. Remember that you are going to be using clay. And if you recall from that demo we just did, that clay will sink like a rock if it is in a ball formation. So you must build a boat that floats. You have to build a boat that floats without actually testing it in water. So you're going to have to really think about that design. Secondly, you're going to have a little bit of a contest. If your boat floats, you and your friends get to figure out who has the best boat. And you will do that by figuring out who can carry the most amount of cargo. And today's cargo is going to be in the form of pennies. Whoever builds a boat that carries the most pennies is going to win. Let's talk about the materials that we are going to need for this lab. As always, our materials are very simple and very easy to find. We use modeling clay that you can find in any craft store or department store. They come in these tubes, and all you really need to do is to cut these tubes into four equal pieces, and you will have four clay samples for four different cubs that they can work with. So it's a very inexpensive activity. You'll need pennies because that's your cargo. You're going to need a lot of pennies in some cases. I use a plastic knife just to do my cutting. It's always a good idea to do this experiment on some wax paper only because the clay kind of gets sticky. By the way, if your clay is very, very hard and difficult to work with, it is a simple thing to simply throw it into the microwave for a few seconds until it softens, and it makes it easier for the cubs to work with it. I also recommend using a lot of paper towels because yes, this activity, especially when you get down to the testing part in the contest, you're going to be needing a basin with some water in it. So make sure that you find a plastic basin or a large container or maybe even a large plastic bin that is big enough to hold all of the boats of your cubs. Okay, I guess you're ready now. Cub leaders, this is a good time to pause the video. Your cubs are going to now be creating their crafts. Remember, don't let them put it into water to test it. I want them to really think about what they are doing. This is going to be very important for them to understand why certain things float. And after you run your testing in your large plastic bin with water in it and you find a winner, we will discuss why some boats work better than others. Well, I hope things went well. We are now going to think a little bit more about why certain boats work better than others. And I want you to think about this. Think about a boat. A boat is very, very, very large. Okay. It's extremely heavy. This sample boat is about 14,450 tons. That's a very heavy boat. But it's also extremely large. It's a very, very large object. And most of that boat is air. Believe it or not, most of that boat is air. And the fact of the matter is, the weight of the boat is never going to be the same as the amount of water, the weight of the water that it can displace. So if you sank that boat, it would actually displace 19,000 tons of water. Because the boat cannot displace its weight in water, it will float. You're probably wondering why I'm holding a bowl. Let me tell you a secret. When you shape clay in the shape of a bowl, it acts like a really good boat. Not only that, it carries a lot of pennies. The record Cub Scout that I've had, the record for pennies, is 42. He was a second grader. It was a huge accomplishment for him. And I'm hoping that some of you can beat that record. So I hope you had a good time today running this experiment on finding out what makes things float. And I hope you always think about that whenever you see a leaf on a pond or a rock underneath the water. There's a reason why some things float and some things don't. Thank you very much for joining us today.